What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. What I'm about to share with you is not a rumor, it's not speculation, and it's not social media hype. This is straight from a central bank document. A central bank has openly acknowledged that XRP could function as a replacement for bank deposits, while at the same time clearly stating that Bitcoin and Ethereum are not suitable for that role. Let that sink in for a moment, and if you think the market has fully understood what just happened here, you're about to realize how early we actually are. Stay with me until the end, because once you see how all of this connects, you'll understand why this moment matters far more than most people realize. Before we go any further, I want to make one thing very clear. People don't truly change their financial future because of luck. They don't do it by perfectly timing tops and bottoms. Real shifts happen when people understand structural changes before the majority catches on. That's the entire reason I focus on early positioning and system-level thinking. When liquidity cycles change and financial infrastructure evolves, those who understand it early gain the biggest advantage. Now let's talk about what's actually happening, because this is where things start getting interesting. We've all seen the recent whale activity, more than $1 million placed into high-leverage positions around the $2 range. And let me be very clear, this is not retail behavior. This isn't someone clicking buy on their phone hoping for a quick moonshot. This is deliberate, calculated capital. Big money doesn't deploy like this without a reason. They don't gamble, they position. So the real question isn't who the whale is. The real question is, what are they positioning for? At the same time this capital is moving, something else is happening quietly in the background. XRP is no longer being framed purely as a speculative asset. It's increasingly being discussed as financial infrastructure. And that distinction changes everything. I've said this before and I'll keep saying it. Institutions don't just want a store of value. They want liquidity. They want efficiency. They want assets that actually perform a function. Bitcoin proved digital scarcity. Ethereum introduced programmability. But neither were designed to move value efficiently at global scale within regulatory frameworks. XRP was. And this brings us directly to the ETF conversation. Not whether XRP gets ETF attention, but how. Institutions don't design products based only on price appreciation. They look at settlement efficiency, compliance, usability, and whether an asset can integrate into the existing financial system without creating friction. XRP checks those boxes in a way Bitcoin and Ethereum simply don't. This is why I've consistently said that one day XRP could surpass Bitcoin in ETF relevance. Not because Bitcoin fails, but because Bitcoin isn't built for what institutions need next. Digital gold has value, but financial plumbing is even more important. And now, for the first time, a central bank has essentially said the quiet part out loud. The Central Bank of Malaysia released a working paper exploring XRP as a potential alternative to traditional bank deposits. Read that carefully. This wasn't a sandbox test or a small payment experiment. It was a discussion around bank deposits. That's a completely different level of conversation. This isn't about making payments faster. It's about redefining how money functions within a system. Naturally, the question comes up, why XRP? Why not Bitcoin? Why not Ethereum? The report explains it clearly. Low transaction costs, high-speed settlement, instant finality. These aren't marketing slogans. These are system requirements. Bitcoin was ruled out due to volatility, energy usage, and scalability. Ethereum was ruled out due to volatility and scalability. Central banks don't care about narratives. They care about what works. This is the part most retail investors miss. Central banks don't research things out of curiosity. They research what they may need in the future. Institutional interest always comes before real implementation. And then came the line that sent shockwaves through the XRP community. Straight from the document, private tokens such as XRP may, in the future, be widely used as a means of payment outside the banking system, potentially replacing cash in circulation or even bank deposits. That's not interpretation, that's not hype, that's official documentation. At the same time, the same paper clearly states that Bitcoin and Ethereum are unsuitable as payment instruments for most use cases due to high volatility and low scalability. So let's zoom out and understand what just happened. Bitcoin is acknowledged as digital gold. Ethereum is viewed as an experimental computation layer. XRP is being evaluated as a monetary instrument. That's a completely different role, and roles matter more than price. Once an asset is assigned a role within global finance, everything around it starts to change. This is why this conversation is no longer about price targets. It's about positioning inside the system itself. And this didn't happen in isolation. Malaysia didn't reach this conclusion randomly. Ripple has been operating in this region for years. Major banks, fintech companies, and payment providers across Southeast Asia have already been using Ripple's infrastructure. Cross-border payments, reduced costs, unlocked liquidity. This isn't future tech, it's live operational infrastructure. So imagine being a central bank. You see domestic fintech companies using Ripple. You see major banks benefiting from it. You see cost reductions and efficiency gains. And at the same time, you're facing a future where traditional deposits are becoming less efficient in a digital economy. Of course, you study XRP. This is how real adoption happens, quietly, methodically, documented step by step, until one day it feels like it appeared overnight. Now layer this on top of everything else happening at the same time. Whale accumulation, ETF discussions expanding, central banks openly researching XRP as a deposit alternative, payment corridors going live. This isn't an XRP hype story. This is an infrastructure story. An infrastructure doesn't explode overnight. It gets built, it gets tested, it gets integrated, and then it becomes unavoidable. Here's the reality. When central banks talk about alternatives to bank deposits, they're not talking about replacing your bank account tomorrow. They're talking about resilience, liquidity stress, a future where traditional balance sheets can't scale fast enough to meet global demand. Global debt is rising. Liquidity mismatches are growing. Cross-border settlement is still slow and expensive. Trillions of dollars are locked in Nostro and Vostro accounts. Banks know this. Regulators know this. Central banks know this. That's why they're researching solutions that don't require rebuilding the entire system from scratch. This is why XRP keeps showing up. Unlike Bitcoin, XRP isn't designed to compete against banks. It's designed to work with them. Unlike Ethereum, it's not trying to turn finance into an experimental playground. It focuses on one thing: moving value efficiently at scale with finality. Sometimes the simplest tools become the most powerful when systems grow complex. Replacing or even supplementing bank deposits changes everything. Deposits sit as liabilities on balance sheets. They require capital buffers and create systemic risk during stress. If even part of that value can move into tokenized liquidity instruments, pressure across the system decreases. That's why this research matters. XRP isn't being positioned as something you buy and hope for. It's being positioned as something you use, a bridge asset, a liquidity layer, a settlement tool. Demand created by utility behaves very differently from demand created by speculation. And this is where ETFs come back into the picture. ETFs aren't just about retail access. They're about custody, compliance, legitimacy, and capital market integration. Once an asset fits cleanly into that framework, capital can flow at scale. Unlike Bitcoin ETFs, which mainly offer passive exposure, XRP-based products can be built around liquidity provisioning, settlement demand, and yield strategies. Institutions don't just chase price, they chase activity. Activity generates fees. Fees generate revenue. That's why XRP's role is just beginning. And here's what ties everything together. The regions exploring XRP at the central bank level are the same regions already using Ripple's infrastructure operationally. Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, high-growth corridors with massive remittance demand and rapidly digitizing economies. They need solutions that work now, not 10 years from now. Ripple's expansion into these regions wasn't random. It was strategic. Build where the pain is highest, prove the model, then scale. This is how infrastructure grows slowly, and then all at once. This is not financial advice, but when you see large capital positioning early, regulatory clarity improving, ETFs expanding, and central banks publishing research all at the same time, that's what early-stage infrastructure adoption looks like. By the time XRP's role is obvious to everyone, the asymmetry will be gone, not because upside disappears, but because the early advantage does. Being early isn't about being first, it's about being informed. We're moving toward a tokenized world. Assets, bonds, treasuries, real estate, commodities. All of it requires instant, reliable, global settlement with finality. That's not Bitcoin's role. That's not Ethereum's strength. That's XRP's lane. And when central banks think about interoperability between CBDCs, private ledgers, and public liquidity, they don't want dozens of bridges. They want one neutral, efficient layer that already works. That's why XRP keeps coming up. Infrastructure always moves before markets recognize it. The internet didn't explode the day its protocols were finalized. It exploded years later when adoption reached critical mass. We're still in the build phase. And if you're watching this right now, you're not late. You're early enough to still understand what's happening. Because real wealth isn't built by reacting to charts. It's built by recognizing when systems are changing, positioning wisely, and letting time do the work. If this helped you see the bigger picture, hit the like button. It helps more than you think. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next. I'll see you in the next video.